Hello, my name is Doris, and I am 35 years old. 6 years ago, I married my husband Mason, who is 3 years my senior. My life changed significantly when my beloved father passed away from an illness, leaving behind a substantial inheritance. I invested this inheritance in purchasing a new house, which I cherish dearly. The fresh scent of wood in this house is comforting, and I often think about how proud my father would be to see it. Previously, my father lived alone in our old house, a mere 10-minute walk from our apartment, after my mother passed away and I moved out. A few years ago, my father suffered a fall and passed away not long after. With the inheritance, I made the difficult decision to demolish our old family home and build a new one in its place. I believe that while the structure of the old house is no longer there, the joyful memories we made will forever reside in our hearts. Mason often quoted my father about the significance of building a new home as a fresh start. Initially, I thought he was trying to comfort me, but it soon became clear that was not the case. One evening, Mason abruptly asked me to fill out and submit divorce papers. Confused, I asked him what he meant. He bluntly stated that we were getting a divorce and that the new home, built with my father's inheritance, was intended for his mistress, with whom he planned to live. I was shocked to learn of his infidelity. He admitted to having an affair for about 9 months. He described his mistress as charming, kind, and genuinely in love with him, a stark contrast to how he described our relationship. Mason claimed that coming home to me was always unpleasant and declared his intention to take the house as alimony, arguing that our childless 6-year marriage had no further benefits for him. Distraught, I sought comfort from Mason, but was met with blame instead. He accused me of being responsible for his actions, asserting that my demeanor pushed him toward his affair and eventual decision to leave. He handed me an envelope containing $12,000, calling it my alimony, and told me to be grateful as he planned to take the new house. Overwhelmed by his betrayal yet composed, I returned the envelope to him, refusing the money. The house, built with memories and inheritance meant to be a sanctuary, had become the center of a heartbreaking revelation. I agreed to the divorce, stating plainly, "If you don't love me anymore, there's no point in us staying married. I don't need the money." Mason seemed surprised by how readily I accepted the end of our marriage. With a nod, he warned, "Well, if you say so, just don't ask for it back later." Within a few days, he had packed up his belongings and left, taking the keys to our newly built house with him. However, shortly after he moved out, Mason frantically called me, his voice tense with panic. "What did you do? The police showed up at the house talking about warrants and charges of trespassing. What's going on?" According to him, the police had barged in while he was with his mistress, demanding to know if they understood the legality of their actions. "We're here because you entered this house with a stolen key, which is both theft and trespassing. Do you understand that?" the officers explained. Mason, shocked and confused, turned to his mistress, who was just as bewildered. "Isn't this your house? You said you wanted to show me?" she murmured. "Be quiet and stay out of this," he snapped as one officer interrupted. "Sorry to disrupt, but we need to handle this at the station." Caught between the police and his mistress, Mason called me in desperation. "Why is this happening all of a sudden? What did you do?" "I haven't done much," I replied calmly. "I simply reported that my house keys were stolen and that strangers were in my home. It's only natural to call the police. I had already filed the divorce papers, reverted to my maiden name Doris, and reported the situation." "This is my house, Mason," I continued, standing firm. "Didn't you agree to give it to us as alimony?" he argued. "I never agreed to that," I countered. "It's convenient for you to twist things to fit your narrative." "Are you joking? How can you think that house is yours? I'm the one on the house contract. I paid for it with my inheritance from my father. Plus, I own the land," I stated definitively. "But your father said it was for us," Mason protested weakly. "That was when you were my husband. Now we're divorced and practically strangers. Why would you think it's your land?" I replied sharply. My father had wisely transferred the land rights to me when he fell ill, to prevent any complications if something happened to him. Perhaps he foresaw something like this, which might be why he advised demolishing the old house and building a new one. It was clear to me now, more than ever, that money and property could easily become points of contention. When I agreed to the divorce, Mason's usually calm demeanor started to make sense to me. "So, you planned this all along," I realized. He defensively replied, "I did nothing wrong. You've misunderstood everything from the start." It was almost comical to see him so clueless, thinking he would be happy with his mistress. "Stop being ridiculous," I retorted. "You blame me for the affair, the divorce, and losing the house. How does it feel now, being caught between your girlfriend and the police?" Mason could only muster a groan in response, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Hating me as misguided, "This mess is entirely what you're doing. Ever heard of you reap what you sow? This is what you deserve." At that moment, Mason's anger erupted, and he began shouting accusations over the phone, but suddenly his voice was interrupted. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Gold's ex-wife? He's causing a disturbance at your house. Could we have a word, please?" A police officer had taken over the call. I took a moment to explain the situation to the officer, who sympathized with how difficult this must have been for me. Later on, Mason and his mistress were taken to the police station. Mason insisted that the house was a gift from me and claimed it wasn't a case of trespassing. His mistress, genuinely surprised, stated she had no idea they were trespassing. Mason tried to support his claims with so-called evidence at the station, but ultimately the mistress's statement was found credible, and she was released with just a warning. Mason, however, was found guilty of theft and trespassing and received a fine. The issue then arose that Mason had named me as his guarantor upon his release, probably because he didn't want his strict parents to find out. The officer, clearly exasperated, relayed this information to me. "Why should I be his guarantor? We're divorced and practically strangers now," I replied firmly. "I have no connection with Mr. Gold anymore, so I refuse. He has parents nearby. Please contact them." The officer informed Mason, who was visibly frustrated. His parents, who were already aware of our divorce due to his infidelity, were not yet informed of his attempt to take the new house. The police call had brought them fully up to speed on the situation. Reluctantly, after his parents requested more details, I visited Mason's parents' house. When I knocked on the door and started to explain, his mother immediately cut me off. "No need to apologize," his mother said. "It's all my foolish son's fault. But did you know about this?" "About what?" I inquired. "Well, my son is here with his mistress, a much younger woman," she revealed. We allowed them into the living room to discuss the situation. To my astonishment, Mason had brought his mistress along, creating a tense atmosphere. The living room scene unfolded with Mason, the young woman, and my stern-looking father-in-law, Russell. "Russell, it's been a while. I'm sorry for the delay," I greeted them. "Doris, thanks for coming," Russell responded. "I apologize for calling you after the divorce, but I've heard Mason's side of the story. However, I can't fully trust someone who's been arrested for trespassing. Can you tell me your side?" I recounted everything as requested. Throughout my explanation, Mason and his mistress kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. "What were you thinking, trying to take Doris's new house? Are you insane?" Russell demanded of Mason. "It's not that simple," Mason interjected. "Resolved how? Is that even possible?" Russell retorted, clearly frustrated. "Your story is completely different from hers." Apparently, Mason had spun his version of events before I arrived. "What were you told?" I asked. Russell explained. "He claimed you willingly transferred the house to him, then changed your story and reported him, leading to his wrongful arrest." "Really? He said that?" I was incredulous. "It's true that when we discussed the house, I didn't object, but that doesn't mean I agreed to transfer ownership. To suddenly claim the house as yours and report it, it's beyond comprehension." "I'm so sorry, Doris, for having such a son," Mason's mother apologized. "What are you saying, Mom? I'm telling the truth." Doris wasn't agreeing. She was too stunned to speak, Mason argued. "How could you misunderstand and still claim to be her husband?" I nodded in agreement with Russell. Despite everything, Mason continued to make excuses. Anyway, you never mentioned owning the land. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done this. If I had told you, you'd have found another excuse to do the same thing, I replied. How can you say that? Were you spending a lot on her? Mason asked, gesturing towards his mistress. No, why would you think that? I responded. Right after our divorce, I happened to run into one of your colleagues. When I mentioned the divorce, I received some shocking information that left me reeling, I continued. Mason's colleague had looked uncomfortable during our conversation. No offense, but I thought it might happen, the colleague had said. What do you mean? Didn't he tell you? I asked the colleague. Shifting uncomfortably, the colleague finally spilled everything, revealing details that I should have known sooner. I wasn't initially aware of the full extent of Mason's actions, but a conversation with one of his colleagues soon brought everything to light. Mason had been openly bragging about his mistress, a woman 15 years his junior, lavishing her with expensive bags and jewelry. He boasted about his plans, even sharing that he intended to divorce me to marry his mistress, capitalizing on her recent inheritance from her deceased father to build a new house. He said, once the house is built, I'll divorce Doris and somehow claim it, no matter the opposition. I'll get it, and then my young new wife and I will live in the big house, the colleague recounted. It seemed the house built with my father's inheritance was not just a home but a grand gesture intended for his proposal to her. Hearing this, I confronted Mason. I've heard everything. Do you still insist you did nothing wrong? I asked, my frustration evident. Mason, visibly flustered, attempted to justify his actions. Well, yes, I bought her gifts, so what? I used my own money and gave Doris her living expenses. She's not my destined partner, this woman is. I brought her here today to announce our marriage. His parents, present during this confession, reacted with shock. However, the most astonishing response came from the mistress herself. Marry you? Did I ever say that? We're not even dating, she declared. What do you mean? Mason asked, bewildered. Exactly that, she replied firmly. I'm not in a relationship with him. I only approached him for a sugar daddy arrangement. I told you from the start that I was looking for someone for that kind of arrangement, and even married men were acceptable. You agreed to it initially, but now, what are you talking about? That's creepy, she stated. Mason went pale, stunned by her revelation. At that point, I asked her, so why did you come here with him today? The mistress explained. I came to ask for more time to pay the alimony. I knew he was married, so it was an affair, and I was prepared to pay the alimony, but I'm still a student. A student? How old are you? Russell, Mason's father, interjected, looking bewildered. I lost my parents early and have been engaging in sugar dating to pay for college. I sold all the gifts for living expenses, she confessed. This revelation turned the entire room silent, leaving everyone to digest the depth of deception and the surprising turn of events. As the discussion unfolded, the mistress clarified her financial situation, indicating she didn't have savings to immediately start paying the alimony. I've just secured a job and can start paying alimony from my salary, she explained. So you came here to ask me to wait for the alimony? I asked. Yes, that's right, she confirmed. Mason, who had been silently listening, suddenly erupted in anger. Didn't you hear her? Unfortunately, she never intended to marry or even date you, but that's separate from the alimony you owe, I pointed out, trying to steer the conversation back to the matter at hand. What about saying you wanted a house? Mason challenged the mistress. I meant I'd want a house someday when I marry. It wasn't about marrying you, she replied, clarifying her intentions. Mason exclaimed in disbelief. I was suddenly taken to that house thinking it was yours. Then the police came and I learned it was your wife's. The mistress bowed deeply to me, indicating her respect and acknowledging that all of this confusion was spurred by Mason's misunderstandings. All right, I said, seeing an opportunity to resolve at least one issue. If you promise to pay the alimony properly, I'll wait for the payment, but promise me, no more sugar dating. It might not end simply next time. I promise I'll never do it again, she said earnestly. Turning to Mason, I addressed the financial aspects of our separation. Expect a claim for alimony from me without delay. Alimony? What are you talking about? Mason asked, taken aback and not expecting to pay alimony himself. You said you didn't need alimony when you returned the money, I reminded him. I gave you $12,000 and now you're asking for more? That's not what we agreed on, Mason protested. I don't recall any agreement, I replied. You returned the $12,000 I gave you, saying you didn't need it. What I meant was that I didn't need such a trivial amount for alimony. Do you have any idea how much alimony for infidelity is? It's $30,000, I clarified. And you're also at fault for not having children in the 6 years we were married, Mason suddenly accused, changing the subject. At that moment, a loud slap echoed through the room. Someone asked, "What are you doing, Mason?" He held his cheek, clearly stunned by the impact. Are you serious? Do you think her inability to have children is her fault? I asked, incredulous at his audacity. Enough with your jokes, Dad, Mason's father interrupted, turning to him. Don't tell me you're blaming Doris for your affair, too. Well, that's how it is, Mason said defiantly. I should have never married her. It's like fraud. How could you think that? I challenged him. Your parents wanted grandchildren. If she couldn't get pregnant, they thought it was better to split up. That's why I chose her. If you truly believe that, Mason's father said, visibly disappointed, then we must have raised you wrong. It took your mother 8 years to conceive you. Mason's mother, Deborah, had endured 8 long years of intense fertility treatments before Mason was born. The strain and heartache of watching others easily start families while she struggled were immense. Now, as she listened to the unfolding drama, tears streamed down her cheeks, a silent witness to the pain revisited by her son's actions. Mason's father, Russell, deeply disappointed, finally said, "Leave this house now." Mason, clearly bewildered, asked, "Why? You're a long-awaited son and I can't bear to look at you now," Russell responded with heavy sadness in his voice. "Don't come back until you truly understand your mistakes." "But where should I go?" Mason asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Back to our apartment?" I interjected. "That apartment has already been canceled. With the new house, there was no need to keep it. I canceled it right after reporting it to the police. You have no place to return to." Mason was visibly shaken, realizing he had nowhere to go. In his frustration, he turned his blame toward his mistress. "It's your fault. All the money is spent, and now you say you never intended to marry me? It's fraud." She remained calm and responded, "I was clear about it being a sugar relationship from the start. I never asked for money or gifts. If you want to sue, go ahead, but I have proof of our arrangement." "And don't forget the alimony," I chimed in, seeing Mason flustered. "Wait, please wait," he stammered. Ignoring his plea, I contacted his parents to inform them of the situation and then left their house. Later, I hired a lawyer and sent a demand letter for the alimony. Knowing Mason no longer lived at his parents' house, I made sure it wasn't sent there. "Why is it being sent here?" the receptionist at Mason's workplace asked, puzzled as she looked at the letter. "It's possible to send such documents to both residential and employment addresses," I explained. "Is this what this is about?" she inquired, noticing Mason's pale, shaken demeanor. "Yes," I confirmed. "I just told the truth. No one asked me to keep quiet. It's his own doing." The arrival of the demand letter at Mason's workplace quickly spread the news about his actions, including his involvement in sugar dating. This revelation sparked a wider discussion among his colleagues, casting a shadow over his professional reputation. After a series of embarrassing losses and being unable to cope with the whispers and rumors, Mason decided to resign from his job, insisting that he was leaving on his terms. His difficulties didn't stop there. He sought out free legal advice, convinced that he was a victim of marriage fraud. However, the legal advisor was not encouraging. "We've seen cases like yours, but based on the evidence you've provided, this isn't considered fraud. You initially agreed to a sugar relationship," the advisor explained. "If you develop feelings later on, that was on your part alone. You can sue if you wish, but it's likely just a waste of money." Heeding the advice, Mason chose not to file the lawsuit. Feeling defeated, he later confided in me, regretting his past actions. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't realize how significant you were, even after 6 years together. I promise I'll make you happy this time and won't let myself be distracted by others," he pleaded earnestly. However, his plea did not move me. My decision was firm. "I refuse," I replied sharply. "Why, after all this begging?" he persisted. Over those 6 years, I had come to recognize that Mason was not a good person. He blamed everything on me, tried to take what was mine, and then shamelessly returned after losing everything, expecting reconciliation. What benefit would there be for me to reunite with someone so selfish? I questioned. Mason protested. "You don't have to put it that way. You once said the same things to me." Nonetheless, I was resolute. "Never contact me again," I stated firmly, aware of his current predicament. I then hung up, deleted all his contact information, and changed my phone number. A few days later, an unexpected incident occurred. "Your ex-husband came to the house the other day," one of the neighbors informed me. "We had to chase him away after he caused a disturbance." What was he thinking? I wondered aloud, shocked. The neighborhood ladies, familiar with the situation, had even pretended to call the police to scare him off. Since then, I haven't seen him and am unsure of his whereabouts or his current situation, but I'm confident that he isn't leading a happy life.
"Hey, what's going on with this house? Is everything okay?" I asked my husband, trying to keep my voice calm. "Oh, my mom and dad bought it," he replied casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I froze, my mind racing to comprehend his words. They bought it? My heart sank, disbelief quickly twisting into anger. The same in-laws who constantly begged us for money, complaining about barely making ends meet? Where did they get the money for this? They're always saying they don't have anything, I demanded, my voice rising with each word. He scoffed, not even bothering to look at me, and said casually, "They bought it with your money. My name is Teresa. I have been married to my husband, Maverick, for 5 years now. We met at a bar. For me, it was a bar I was more or less forced to go to by a colleague from my workplace. I wasn't enthusiastic about it and just sat at the far end, drinking my alcohol. It was cheap there, so I thought I might as well drink a lot to make it worthwhile. That's all I was thinking about when Maverick approached me and started talking. I was forced to come here too. It's my first time at this bar," he said with a smile. Indeed, Maverick was sitting at the far end just like me, drinking silently. Maverick and I hit it off immediately. We had many things in common, such as our favorite movies, manga, and games. That day marked the beginning of our regular meetings, which eventually led to our relationship. 2 years into our relationship, Maverick proposed to me in his apartment. We got married shortly after. 6 months into our marriage, we were blessed with a child. I decided to quit my job and become a stay-at-home mom. To be honest, I initially planned to take short maternity and parental leave since I loved my job. But Maverick suggested, "I want you to be a homemaker at this time." So I became a full-time homemaker. I didn't dislike housework, and during my pregnancy, I enjoyed relaxing and feeling our baby grow inside me. Even after our child was born, I cherished witnessing their daily growth. Since our child was born, we started visiting Maverick's parents more often. Maverick has a sister who got married before us, but didn't have children yet. She and her husband lived near Maverick's parents, and got along well with them. Whenever we visited my husband's parents, we always stopped by his sister's house. She was very fond of me, and I loved her too. In fact, I looked forward to visiting her more than Maverick's parents. To be honest, I didn't enjoy visiting his parents because they constantly made snide remarks about me. Every time we visited, Maverick's mother would greet us with, "Oh, Teresa, you came too?" It would have been fine if just Maverick and Zion came. While I appreciated how much Maverick's parents adored our son, Zion, their blatant disdain for me was impossible to ignore. My mother-in-law frequently added comments like, "Teresa, you really don't have to come if you don't want to. We're just happy to see Maverick and Zion." And then there was my father-in-law, who once went as far as to say, "Honestly, watching you makes me sick." Maverick, however, either didn't hear these remarks, or chose to pretend they didn't happen. He would always act like he was focused on our son instead, even though he rarely took care of Zion at home. After several years of enduring this, one day, I received a call from Maverick while he was at work. "Teresa, listen to me. Something serious has happened," he said in a frantic tone. "What happened? Calm down and tell me," I asked, alarmed. "Oh, right, sorry. I'm just a little out of it. Actually, my mother," he began, but I interrupted him. "What happened to her?" I asked, confused. "She sprained her ankle. She needs help right away," he said, clearly agitated. I honestly thought he was making a fuss over nothing. In the past, when I was unwell, Maverick had taken care of our son by himself. During that time, Zion slipped down the stairs and broke his ankle because Maverick wasn't paying attention. I panicked and insisted we take him to the hospital, but Maverick dismissed it as an overreaction. In the end, I took Zion to the hospital myself. Compared to that, a sprained ankle seemed trivial. But a sprain doesn't mean there's a fracture, right? If she just rests, it should get better, shouldn't it? I concluded. "You're pretty cold, Teresa. I didn't think you were like that." Maverick sighed. "No, I didn't mean it that way," I replied, but Maverick cut me off. "I'm going back to work," he said, and hung up. When Maverick came home that evening, he was still in a bad mood. I greeted him. "Welcome home, I'll warm up your dinner. Do you want to take a bath first?" He ignored me, went straight to take a bath, and then ate silently. I decided to apologize after dinner. "Hey Maverick, I'm sorry about the phone call earlier. I understand you're worried about your mom," I said gently, trying to bridge the growing distance between us, even though the weight of his silence lingered. Maverick looked at me and replied, "As long as you understand, it's fine. There's something I wanted to talk to you about too." "Something you wanted to talk about?" I asked. "Yeah, you know my mom sprained her ankle, right? So, she's unable to do housework for a while, and she's asking if she can live with us?" "Live with us? Until she recovers?" I inquired. "No, indefinitely," he said. I couldn't help but let out a loud gasp and quickly covered my mouth, afraid I'd wake Zion. "Why would she live with us permanently?" I asked in a hushed voice, trying to stay calm. "Why not? We're planning to live together eventually." "Aren't you worried about Mom?" Maverick replied, looking at me with surprise, as if my question was completely out of place. "Eventually? That's news to me," I replied, shocked. "What? Is Mom not a concern for you, Teresa?" My husband shot back, his tone sharper now, as if I had just admitted to some unforgivable flaw. I knew if I pushed back too much, his mood would sour again, but the idea of living together permanently felt overwhelming. As I expressed my concerns, Maverick made a displeased face and said, "If you don't like it, I can take Zion and go to my parents' house." "No, that's not necessary," I replied. "That would be really inconvenient. Being able to stay with my son is the most important thing for me." Reluctantly, I accepted his proposal to live together with his parents. As soon as I agreed, Maverick's mood shifted. He smiled as if a weight had been lifted. Looking back now, I think to myself, I should have thought more carefully. Maybe I rushed because I felt cornered, faced with the ultimate choice of living apart from or with my son. Once the decision was made, Maverick wasted no time. "From now on, we'll live with Grandpa and Grandma," he said cheerfully as he packed with our son. Our son seemed thrilled, and it was no surprise. To him, my in-laws were still loving grandparents, and he was too young to notice their disdain for me. I tried to reassure myself, thinking, if my son is happy, that's what matters most. If I can just endure, everything will be fine. But I would soon come to realize just how wrong I was. On moving day, we arrived at my in-laws' house. Maverick and Zion were greeted warmly. I, on the other hand, was met with indifference. "Oh, so Teresa is coming along too, huh?" my mother-in-law said, her voice dripping with annoyance. "Maverick and Zion could have come by themselves," my mother-in-law commented, once again emphasizing how unwelcome my presence was. From the beginning, it was clear they hated me. I resolved to avoid conflict and live quietly, but reality had other plans. Whenever my mother-in-law claimed, "I can't do the housework because I have plans with a friend," I would step in to help. But no matter what I did, it was never good enough. "Hey, the way you hang laundry is all wrong. Do it again," she'd say, undoing all my work. My father-in-law wasn't any better. "What's with this coffee? I can't drink this," he grumbled. Even when Maverick witnessed these moments, he acted as though nothing was happening. The only one who defended me was Zion. "Don't be mean to my mom," he would say, his little voice full of defiance. But my in-laws would only smile and reply, "No, Zion, you don't understand. Grandma and Grandpa are upset because your mom is doing bad things." They made me out to be the villain. After months of enduring this treatment, I finally broke down and confronted Maverick. "I've had enough. You see what's going on, right? If you can't support me, then let's end this cohabitation," I pleaded through tears. But Maverick only laughed. "You're being dramatic. Mom and Dad are just trying to educate you to be a respectable wife," he explained. "What does it mean to be a respectable wife? I'm doing my best and all I get is harassment and sarcasm," I argued. "You're being persistent," Maverick added sharply. "Maybe the problem is you. Take a step back and cool your head." With that, he went to bed, leaving me alone with my frustration. That night, I began to feel something new. Maybe I can't keep doing this. Maybe I can't continue with him anymore. A month later, still without any support from Maverick, I started to think seriously about leaving. But then Maverick surprised me one evening with an announcement. "Teresa, we're moving to a new apartment," my husband cheerfully exclaimed. "Huh? We're moving?" I asked, stunned. "Yes," he replied with a grin. Maybe he's finally decided to move out because of me, I thought hopefully. But anxiety gnawed at me, and I asked, "Does this mean your parents aren't coming with us?" "Of course," Maverick said, smiling. "I've already talked to them." His calm demeanor reassured me, and I let myself believe that this decision was for my benefit. I started packing the next day, hopeful about starting fresh away from my in-laws. The day before the move, I noticed my mother-in-law packing her belongings. Confused, I asked, "Why are you packing?" "What do you mean?" she replied. "We're all moving tomorrow, remember?" Stunned, I immediately called Maverick. "What's going on? Why didn't you tell me your parents were coming too?" "What's the problem?" he replied casually. "Is that an issue?" Devastated, I realized the new start I'd been hoping for wasn't going to happen. But with no other options, I reluctantly prepared for the move. On moving day, Maverick was practically bouncing with excitement. "We're almost there," he said as we approached the new apartment. The complex was luxurious and far nicer than I'd expected. Turning to me with a grin, Maverick exclaimed, "Surprise, Teresa? Did I catch you off guard?" I couldn't help but worry about the cost. "The rent here must be expensive, right?" I asked cautiously. "Don't worry about it for now," Maverick said, cutting me off mid-sentence. He led me to my own room, and I saw that everyone else had their own rooms too. They were all so happy and excited, even though I couldn't believe how we could afford such an expensive place. So I called my husband into my room to ask him about it. "Hey, what's the deal with this house? Is it okay?" I asked. "Oh, my dad and mom bought it," he said nonchalantly. "Did they actually buy it?" I thought, shocked. Those in-laws who always begged us for money, claiming they had none? I couldn't believe it. "Where did they get the money? They always say they're broke. You're lying, right?" When I pressed him seriously, my husband just snorted and answered, "They bought it with your money." "Huh? What do you mean?" I burst out. His unexpected response made my palms sweat. Then my husband spoke cheerfully. "You had savings, didn't you? I borrowed that money and used it. My savings, the ones my husband was talking about, were the savings I had desperately accumulated until now for my son Zion's future. I told you I was saving that money for Zion's future. Why did you do something so selfish?" I retorted with a hint of anger. My husband retorted with a tantrum. "You can just save it again. You're overreacting." At that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't bear to stay in that house any longer. I forcibly grabbed my son's hand, whom I had been talking to my in-laws with, and left the house. I couldn't stand the air in that house anymore. "What's wrong, Mom?" my son asked with a puzzled expression. I was desperately trying to hold back my tears. Even though we left the house, we had nowhere to go. My parents' house was far away, and even if we went back now, the train wouldn't make it all the way. Then my son looked up at me and asked curiously, "Are we going to Aunt Ashley's?" Aunt Ashley was my husband's sister, my sister-in-law. If we went to her house, we could get there in less than an hour. Thinking that, I said to my son, "Yes, we are." And we headed straight to my sister-in-law's house. Despite coming unannounced, my sister-in-law warmly welcomed us. When I explained the situation to her, she said, "For the time being, you can stay at our house until you settle down." "I'm sorry this happened," she added. I was so grateful for her words. My son and I ended up staying at my sister-in-law's house. The next day, when I woke up in the morning, my sister-in-law was already gone, and she didn't return until late afternoon. She looked extremely tired. "What happened?" I asked her. She sighed and said, "I went to see my family. They turned out to be such foolish people, but don't worry, I made sure they signed the contract," she said, handing me a document with a smile on her face. On that paper, it was written that they would fully repay the money they had taken from my savings without permission. "You went through all this trouble for me?" I asked, on the verge of tears. My sister-in-law smiled and said, "Well, it's the least I could do after my ridiculous family caused you so much trouble. I wouldn't feel right if I didn't step in." I thanked her profusely. The next day, I returned to my parents' house with my son. As soon as I arrived, I hired a lawyer and demanded a divorce from my husband. From him, I received messages filled with empty words like, "Please reconsider." I was in the wrong, but within me there was no room for reconsidering the divorce anymore. I deleted all his contact information and instructed my lawyer to convey my intention of not withdrawing the divorce. Considering that he had used my savings without permission, my husband understood, from the lawyer's explanation, that refusing the divorce further would work against him. He eventually accepted it. Thanks to my sister-in-law's contract, the savings that had been used without permission were quickly reimbursed. My husband sold the luxurious apartment he had bought and used the money to settle the payment to me. However, the savings he had used without permission were merely a down payment, and the remaining loan for that apartment still existed even after its sale, now serving as the debt of my in-laws. My husband faced consequences as well, and I made sure to claim educational expenses for our son until he comes of age. Now, it seems my ex-husband and in-laws live together in a cramped, run-down apartment. With this, my revenge is perfectly complete. I now live happily with my son, receiving support from my parents in my childhood home. Of course, I regularly meet with my sister-in-law, and our relationship remains strong. She insists on cutting ties completely with her family and has no involvement with them anymore. Next year, my sister-in-law and her husband are expecting a baby. Once the baby is born, we have a promise to go out together with my son, making it a party of 5. By then, I aim to become an independent mother, one my son can be proud of. With that in mind, I cherish every day of my life.